Ms. Ho Ching, esteemed guests and colleagues, the title of my talk was supposed to be Baby to 80, but I changed it to Baby to 120, as 120 is the new 80, or could be within many of our lifetimes. Regardless of the direction human lifespan may be taking, I posit that it is more important to focus on health span, which I believe begins with a good start to life. Getting a good start to life begins even before we are born. The generations that come before us determine our health and human potential, and it goes well beyond our DNA. What do I mean when I say human potential? It is the set of intrinsic health and abilities that an individual is conceived with that is influenced by biological, environmental, and socio-economic factors throughout their lives. The aim is to help all individuals get the best start to life and to develop optimally throughout their life course. This is best done as early as possible when the biology of the individual is still moldable and the effects of early intervention are most effective. Especially for the human brain, where much of the critical socio-emotional skills, habits, and executive functions are developed and set in the preschool years, especially before the age of 4. Trying to change these after children start formal schooling at the age of 7 requires a lot more effort and may be less effective. Let me tell you about a study that I've been involved in for the last 17 years. The Growing Up in Singapore Towards Healthy Outcomes, or GUSTO study, was launched in 2009 and recruited over 1,200 mothers in Singapore in the first trimester of pregnancy. We've been following these mothers, children, and their families very closely since then. The oldest children turned 16 years of age last November and are probably the most intensively studied teenagers in the world. The striking thing about the GUSTO study is the depth, breadth, and longitudinal nature of the phenotyping and biological measurements made. For example, in the first 2 years of life, these children and families were studied 11 times through home and clinic visits. We collected the DNA, microbiome, and blood of the mothers and babies. We performed EEG studies on the first day of life and whole body MRIs at 1 week, which were then repeated roughly every 2 years from the age of 4. Detailed neurodevelopmental, body composition, and cardiometabolic studies were conducted regularly as they grew up. And in their teenage years, we are now focusing more on their social behaviors and connections. Let me give you an example of the type of neurodevelopmental testing we did as the children grew up. We developed a whole child panel in GUSTO to assess pre-academic skills as well as behavioral and social-emotional functioning in children, and performed it on the GUSTO children at 4 years of age in their homes. We found that the whole child panel could predict at the age of 4 years the children who would require special learning support when they entered primary or junior school at 7 years of age, with a 93% sensitivity and 86% specificity. This was based on real-life Ministry of Education testing of our subjects when they entered school. Almost 12% of the GUSTO children required special learning support. We found that pre-academic skills alone, which is what most educators test, at age 4, at most explain 1/3 of the variance in the need for special learning support at age 7 years. In contrast, family demographics, health and pregnancy, and especially preschool executive functions contribute 50 to 70% of the risk prediction. Another example of the detailed testing were the whole body MRIs we performed on the GUSTO babies at 1 week of life. We were particularly interested in the neurodevelopment of the babies and performed detailed scans of the brain at 1 week, 4.5 years, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, and now 14 years of life. This has resulted in many publications over the years. One of our earliest findings was published in 2013, when we found that high levels of depressive symptoms in the mothers during pregnancy was associated with microstructural changes to the right amygdala of the newborns at 1 week of life, which is the part of the brain that processes negative emotions, suggesting the possibility of transmission of vulnerability for mood anxiety disorders from mother to child. These findings persisted when we repeated MRIs subsequently. But these are only associations between maternal emotional health and MRI findings. Are there any functional consequences for these children? Yes, there are. At 4 years of life, when we administered our whole child panel, which measures school readiness, as I mentioned earlier, children of mothers with both subclinical and clinical levels of depression perform significantly worse than children of mothers with low levels of depressive symptoms during pregnancy. The difference in performance being about 1 standard deviation, which is very significant for behavioral and social-emotional problems, general knowledge, fluid reasoning, and executive functions. You may well ask how maternal mood during pregnancy can affect the child's neurodevelopment and subsequent performance. The framework shown here is conceptual, but we have shown that maternal stress is associated with alterations in the baby's brains on MRI as early as 1 week of age and persists in later years. Executive functions include the ability to sustain attention, process information, and regulate emotional states, all of which are essential for learning and school performance. In fact, executive functions are probably more important than IQ in determining success in life. From the Dunedin study, which has been following children in New Zealand since 1972, they have found that childhood self-control promoted various aspects of physical, mental, and social well-being. On the other hand, having poor executive functions or self-control in childhood is predictive of poor outcomes in adulthood. Many children with poor self-control grow up to be adults, smokers, criminals, and live on welfare. Of the 4 predictive risk factors for poor outcomes, low self-control or poor executive functions in children is a factor that we are most likely able to improve. How do we optimize executive functions in children from birth? Let's look at maternal sensitivity, which is defined as the caregiving attributes of a mother to appropriately perceive, communicate, and respond to her young child's signals. In Gusto, maternal sensitivity was measured through video coding of a 15-minute mother-child interaction. Greater maternal sensitivity has positive effects on the child that goes well beyond early childhood to improve school readiness at 4 years of age and academic performance at 9 years. In Gusto, better maternal sensitivity when the baby was 6 months old was associated with better mathematical and reading abilities when the child was 9 years old. Isn't that an amazing finding? This Gusto study was published in October 2024. What shocked me was that over 25% of the children in Gusto reported high levels of depressive symptoms at 8 to 10 years of age. That's scary. But the positive thing is that Gusto findings suggest that better executive function skills may protect against depression and other mental health issues in children at risk. So beyond better school readiness and performance, a good early home environment where sensitive parenting is practiced will promote better executive functions in children that can be protective against risks for childhood depression and other mental health issues. Cognitive flexibility, one of the key components of executive functions, not only leads to better creativity and problem solving, but also better mental health resilience. One of the most essential experiences in shaping the architecture of the developing brain is the serve and return interaction between children and significant adults in their lives. Young children naturally reach out for interaction through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults should respond appropriately and sensitively. This back and forth process is fundamental to the wiring of the brain, especially in the earliest years. This serve and return interaction may come naturally to some adults, but others, especially Asians, may find it awkward and difficult or even dismiss it as indulgent and unnecessary. We should educate carers of young children about the critical importance of these early interactions. Play between a caregiver and child in the early years lays the foundation for healthy child growth and development. Early play interactions affect the development of a child's brain, social skills, language skills, emotional development, and executive functions. Research shows that a caregiver's sensitivity and positive emotions during early play interactions are beneficial for child development, and the evidence for these findings are laid out in these 2 evidence insights which are publicly available, and they come from the Center for Holistic Initiatives in Learning and Development, or CHILD. CHILD was set up with an endowment of $30 million from the Lien Foundation in 2021 to draw on Gusto data and evidence from other studies to implement evidence-based innovation in early childhood development. CHILD bridges evidence and policy by engaging policymakers from various governmental agencies to help translate our science into community interventions. This is a good example of PPP, or public-private partnership, between professors, philanthropists, and policymakers. As in many places worldwide, child obesity in Singapore is rising. Almost 1 in 5 children worldwide are overweight or obese, and this usually leads to poor health as they age. In Gusto, we observed and measured eating behaviors in 4.5- and 6-year-olds by videotaping them in our eating laboratories. What we found was that 3 early eating behaviors were associated with higher adiposity in children. They were 1, eating speed. The faster children ate, the more calories they consumed, and this habit persisted as they grew up and was associated with higher BMIs. 2, portion sizes. If they were served or served themselves larger portion sizes, they also had higher BMIs. And 3, eating in the absence of hunger or snacking. If children were tempted by snacks even after eating their fill, they were prone to overweight. This is partly due to low inhibitory control, which reflects their level of executive functioning. We feel that all these 3 early eating behaviors are modifiable if we act early enough. In this landmark publication, we studied how risk factors for child obesity, like having overweight parents, mothers with excessive gestational weight gain, and high fasting blood sugar, were associated with adiposity in children at 6 years of age. What we found was that regardless of the number of risk factors they had, children do not become overweight unless they had bad eating habits. So the common pathway for child overweight is through how they eat. While we cannot change the genes or parents of children, we can try to modify their early eating behaviors. So another of our child evidence insights focus on eating behaviors in childhood, and I'm happy to report that the Singapore Health Promotion Board, as well as the childcare sector, are taking the findings seriously. We have started pilot studies in preschools involving children 3 to 6 years of age to see if we can modify early eating habits. What can we do to improve health span for everyone across the life course? I like to think of the life course in 3 phases: the current old, the future old, and the people in what Mark Friedman calls the midlife chasm. For the current old, we can look at lifestyle modifications to improve health, strengthen social connections to avoid isolation and loneliness, and to maintain purpose by exploring second or third careers instead of retiring. For those in the midlife chasm, it is worthwhile to look at some of the novel age-slowing strategies which will be discussed by the panel after this. Many are not yet fully proven in humans, but we need to start somewhere. Again, lifestyle modification, although difficult to sustain, has an important place, and they should plan not to retire, but to transition to their next career, paid or otherwise, to remain active in their later years. And for the future old, this is where we really need to invest. We need to start optimizing their health and human potential in early life by enhancing their executive functions, as this has been proven to enable people to plan better, be disciplined, stay healthy, and be successful. At the same time, we need to expose them to a broad base of learning and instill in them natural curiosity so that they can continue learning and relearning throughout their lives to maintain their purpose in life. And finally, we should focus also on people of reproductive age, as their health and well-being will determine the human potential of the next generation. Staying healthy as we age, as we grow old, requires at least 4 things. We have to eat healthy, stay active, sleep well, and find purpose. And to achieve this, we need awareness of what is good for us, discipline to practice this, a system of identifying when things are not going well, and the right interventions that will get each and every one of us back on track on our own terms. Much has been said of the potential longevity dividend as we live longer lives. But for us to get any kind of dividend, we need to first invest. We need to be active shareholders of healthy longevity in order to unlock the longevity dividend. What should we invest for the biggest impact? As I said earlier, awareness. We need to discover and act on what we need to do to age healthily. 2, the future old. For all the reasons I've given, we should continue to make lives easier and better for them in regards to health. 3, biomarkers of aging. Without this, we cannot measure our own state of health and how we respond to interventions. And basically, any intervention design will be a non-starter. 4, preventive health, especially where it relates to aging. And finally, research to improve health span in humans. And I believe the panel will discuss this after this. This is a slide I borrowed from Dr. Ritu Sadana, the WHO senior leader in charge of older people and healthy aging across the life course, showing the WHO framework to optimize health trajectories across the life course, which more or less says the same thing that I have been saying in WHO speak. In summary, I hope my presentation has highlighted how we can take the next step in moving from a good start to life to maintaining good health as we age. The data collected by Gusto identified gaps and opportunities for us to improve our health and human potential at key points across the life course. Researchers investigating the biological and social science of aging have discovered much that we should now be testing in humans to see if we can help people extend their health span as they age. I hope that I've also shown you that research is unlikely to be translated into interventions and policies that will benefit populations without professors going beyond publication, philanthropists' support to pilot interventions, and policymakers adopting and scaling up interventions that work. We need to work together and go beyond to give our children the best start to life and everyone the best opportunity to age healthily. After all, as Jackie Kennedy said, if you mess up your children, nothing else you do really matters. I very much look forward to the new discoveries and ideas that can help all of us live healthy, long, healthy lives. I wish all of you healthy longevity and meaningful prosperity, or in the words of my favorite Vulcan, live long and prosper. Thank you.